Hey, what's up? This is Scott with the Love Tutorials. In this video, we are going to be taking that installation that we did in the last video and exploring it a little bit. We're going to dive into all of the files, talk about why they're there, what they do, and what their purpose is. So let's get going on that now. Okay, so now let's get started. I have this app in my sites folder. What I'm going to be doing is opening it up into VS Code, which is my text editor of choice, Visual Studio Code. You can use anything, Sublime or WebStorm or Atom or anything that you like to work on in these sites. So don't feel like you have to use VS Code. We probably won't be doing anything really super specific to VS Code itself. So I'm going to open this up and let's take a look at what we get with Gatsby. Okay, so I've temporarily bumped up the font size here and the interface size in general. Don't worry, I'm going to increase the font size for the next video, but decrease the interface size because, well, this stuff doesn't need to be this huge over here, but we do want to see what we're working on. I'm going to get rid of this welcome screen, and we're going to be directing most of our attention over here to our file browser. Meanwhile, taking a look at some of these files. So this is basically what you get when you create a new Gatsby site. Now, what is all of this stuff and how can it help us build fast React sites? So let's start up at the top. First, we have our cache folder. Now, this is a .cache folder. If you don't have hidden files turned on, you might not be seeing this. It probably should show up in your text editor regardless, but in your Finder or something like that, you want to make sure you have hidden files turned on if you would like to see this. That said, I almost have never even thought about the cache folder, really, other than maybe occasionally deleting it or something like that. But the cache folder is basically the cached build of the site, allowing for some of Gatsby's extremely fast development and loading times. So I wouldn't necessarily worry too much about the cache folder. It's here. You should know what it does. It's basically allowing for performance, about caching exactly what it says, and that's pretty much it. Next, we have the node modules. Now, if you are familiar with any other node-based site application development, you'll know that the node modules folder contains all of our packages that we need to get this thing up and running. And boy, are there a lot of packages. However, you won't really notice most of these, and chances are you won't ever really think too much about your node modules other than when you're modifying it in your package.json file. And next we have this public folder. Now this public folder looks like it's going to have some stuff in here, whether it's icons or some static folders with some numbers, and an index.html, which is actually HTML, as well as a manifest file and a render page.js. Now, you might be looking at this and being like, well, how do we even use this folder? Well, this folder is actually what's generated by Gatsby. And in fact, when we get into the building videos where we actually build out the site into a static website, this public folder is even going to be more populated with more JavaScript, more HTML folders, and all that sort of stuff. So right now, you can just ignore the public folder because we're not going to be using it at all. We're simply just going to be using the output that comes into this folder, okay? Now, where are we going to be spending most of our time? Well, there's only one folder left, and that's the source folder, which is basically where we're going to be, well, writing our components, loading up our images, creating our pages, and all sorts of basically everything that we do in Gatsby, unless we're working with the built version of the site, is going to take place in the source folder. So this makes it nice and easy to manage because, well, everything that we need is in one spot. I should say for the most part, because, well, some of these Gatsby files down here are also going to get a good look at as well. So let's take a look inside of components. We have a header.js, a layout.css, and a layout.js. Now, those of you who are coming from Gatsby version 1 will know that there used to be a layouts folder inside of here with an index file, and that layout automatically wrapped around your components. With Gatsby 2, that is no longer the case. We have a layout.js. Which file here, again, if some of this looks like gibberish, we have things like a static query, sort of GraphQL with a render prop here. Don't worry, we'll be going over all of this stuff in plain English so you'll know exactly what's going on. But we have a layout file and a header file, which are now just components. And we have a CSS file that's going to be loading our base styles. Now, how are these header and layout components used? Well, they're used inside of a page. You'll notice that index.js includes link, but it also imports layout from components layout. Now, components layout actually has the header in it itself we were to examine layout.js, you would see the header right here. So we don't need to include the header on each individual page. However, on each individual page, we do need to wrap our content in that given layout. Now, those of you who are wondering why this change has happened between Gatsby 1 and Gatsby 2, you can see that Gatsby 2 offers you a lot more flexibility with the layout system. Now, when we want to have different various layouts, all we need to do is create a new layout and then wrap our page in that layout. So this is going to be something that we need to do moving forward with Gatsby if you're familiar with Gatsby from version 1. And if this is your first time using Gatsby 2, then you have now seen that, well, what we need to do is import our layout and wrap each page with our layout if we want that sort of unified page wrapper layout, which I can tell you most sites, many sites do, right? You typically have things like your header, your footer, maybe your metadata and stuff like that. So this is what's going on here. We have our index page, and inside of our index page, we have a layout that wraps around our content, and we're importing a link from Gatsby that allows us to link to another page. And you'll see we have page 2, which is the same business, same stuff, right? Layout wrapping the content, and here is our link. Now, lastly, we have a 404 page, which is basically just going to show when you hit a route that does not exist. And you might be wondering about routing. Well, no worries. We're going to get into routing quite a bit when we talk about pages. Basically, what it comes down to is that if there is a page that exists in the system, Gatsby will allow you to access it via the file title. For instance, our index page is simply just our index page. However, the page-2 page is in fact loaded at /page-2. Okay, so that's an important note, but something we're going to be covering over quite a bit more as we go. And lastly, we have our images folder, inside of which we have a Gatsby icon. Not super important, but we're going to be talking quite a bit about working with assets in a later video. So this is the source folder. Now, next we have our git ignore. If you've used git as a version control system, you'll know that this file tells git which files not to use. Now, we're not going to be talking about git in this series too much. We will be using it to deploy. So I do expect you to have some basic core git skills. Nothing crazy though. We're just going to be committing, pushing up to a repo, that kind of stuff. Okay. Next, we have a prettier.rc or .prettierrc file. Prettier is a code formatter. Okay, and this is a configuration file that allows you to tweak how Prettier runs. Now, Prettier is amazing. If you haven't used it before, you could see that maybe when we modify, let's come in here and I'm going to hit tab and move this onto a new tab. You can see how this is formatted incorrectly now. When I go to save this file, based on how my text editor is set up, you can see that Prettier has automatically replaced this. Basically, it's a linting system for formatting. And you can see Gatsby by default has it tweaked so that semicolons are false. So if you want semicolons, all you need to do is turn this to true. This is a code style thing of Gatsby, and it's something that, you know, I've come to use within Gatsby, but I personally typically leave semicolons to true, but it doesn't really matter. Single quotes will be converted, or quotes I should say, will be converted to single quotes as true, and trailing comma is in fact going to be turned on. So these are formatting options. If you want to learn more about Prettier, you can head to Prettier's own configuration page on their website and learn a little bit more. It's a tool that I highly recommend using on most projects. Next, we have our Gatsby browser file, which you can see implements Gatsby's browser APIs. You can see more about this on this docs page. Now, this file is where you're going to be working with some of Gatsby's browser APIs. We're going to be talking quite a bit more about this file as long as some of our other config files. You can see we have our Gatsby-config file. This file is where you're largely going to be modifying things like site metadata. Allows you to basically store some variables that we can query off of in GraphQL. We'll show you that later, as well as the plugins. Now, Gatsby has an extensive plugin system that allows you to basically extend Gatsby to do all sorts of amazing things very easily. And this is where you go to add plugins to your site. You can see we currently have 2, or it looks like 3 Gatsby plugins installed. Out of the box, Gatsby comes with Gatsby plugin React Helmet. React Helmet is a library that allows you to use metadata, basically allow you to have custom metadata per component. And it's a really awesome library, actually created by the NFL. There's another plugin, which is Gatsby plugin Manifest, which is our basic manifest information for our progressive web apps. Again, this is a progressive web app thing, so you'll probably want to learn a little bit more about that. We will talk about it a little bit. And then Gatsby plugin offline, which again has to do with progressive web apps, basically instituting a service worker to allow this application to work well offline. Cool. Next, we have Gatsby-Node, which is largely where we're going to be going to create pages in the build process. A lot of times, maybe you have a blog that you're bringing in content for WordPress. Instead of creating an individual file inside of pages for each of those pages, you can go through, hit your API, and then create actual pages with a template file based on that result of the API. And you'd be doing that within Gatsby-Node. Okay, lastly is Gatsby-SSR, which implements Gatsby's server-side rendering APIs. Again, we'll be talking quite a bit more about all this stuff. Lastly, we have the license file, which is the basic MIT license for Gatsby. You can have your lawyers read this if you'd like. Then we have our package.lock file. This file locks in all of our package versions so that when I use the site and you use the site and you have multiple people developing on it, if they do npm install, they're all going to get the exact same versions of the software rather than versions within a parameter. Now, next we have our package.json, which is basically what you'd expect from any package.json file. It includes our application information as well as the dependencies. Anytime we add any libraries, plugins, or whatever, you will see them in here. Pretty standard stuff. Next, we have a README, which is just going to be the basic README for Gatsby. If this is your own project, I highly recommend nuking this out and totally changing the contents. And lastly, we have a yarn lock file, which is the same as the package lock file, except for it's for Yarn, which is another package management software, giving you some options between Yarn and NPM. For the most part in this series, we will be using NPM, but you can use Yarn if you'd like. It will work the same. Okay, so those are the files in Gatsby 2. That's it. Wow. Okay, super cool. So in the next video, we're going to get started diving into coding within Gatsby and actually experiencing this stuff, because now we know a little bit about where things are. We're going to be talking about pages and navigation in general within Gatsby. I'm talking about creating pages via React components and a little bit of the stuff that we discussed in this video around that, but we're going to be creating a new page, maybe an About Us page or something fun like that. So fire up the next video as we talk about pages in Gatsby 2.